Have you ever spoken to yourself in a moment of pain and actually listened? Sometimes the world tries to shake what you hold sacred just to see if you'll break. But what happens next isn't about them. It's about you, your spirit, and the choice you make in the silence that follows. When I speak to myself this way, the world responds in kind. What does that mean, really? We often think that our lives are shaped by external forces, other people's decisions, the systems we're born into, the unpredictable changes of life. But one of the most transformational truths I've learned is that the way we speak to ourselves, the tone we use with our own spirit, is often more powerful than any outside voice. It sets the stage for how we experience everything. From the time we are children, we are absorbing language, not just from those around us, but within ourselves. We internalize our caretakers' voices, society's expectations, and the echo of every failure, every compliment, every judgment. And without even knowing it, we begin to construct a narrative, not about the world, but about ourselves. And that narrative, it runs everything. When someone burns something sacred, like the Quran, or any spiritual text, it isn't just an act against a religion. It's an act that disrupts energy, respect, and the sacred codes that societies live by. It sends out a kind of spiritual static into the world. But what I've learned is that the static doesn't only come from others' actions, it begins internally. Every time we speak to ourselves with shame, with unworthiness, with resentment, we participate in a form of self-destruction, and when that's our inner language, the world becomes a mirror for it. I remember sitting in silence during one of my Super Soul Sunday conversations, and my guest said something I never forgot. Your words to yourself are the bricks you build your life with. That hit me like a truth I already knew but hadn't named. We all have that inner dialogue, don't we? Sometimes it's subtle. I can't do this, or they'll never accept me. Sometimes it's louder. I'm not enough, or I deserved that pain. That voice, unchecked, shapes our destiny. What I want to say today is that your self-talk creates a frequency. It's the energy you emit before you say a word out loud, and it tells the universe how to respond to you. If you keep telling yourself you're broken, you'll keep seeing life through shattered glass. If you say you're unworthy, you'll unconsciously invite experiences that affirm that false belief. But when I started shifting the way I spoke to myself, saying things like I am whole, even when I felt fragmented, or I am learning, instead of I failed, something changed. Life didn't magically become easier, but the way I met life became different. The hard times still came, but now, I didn't shrink in their presence. I didn't abandon myself at the first sign of discomfort. I stood beside myself. I had my own back, because I had already been practicing compassion, not just for others, but for the little girl inside me, who still needed to hear, "You're safe, you matter, I love you." I've seen people do unspeakable things, acts of hatred, destruction, cruelty, and every single time, I've wondered what was their inner voice saying. What were they telling themselves before they made a choice that disconnected them from their own humanity? The people who violate peace often have no peace within. The people who desecrate the sacred are often disconnected from the sacred inside of them, and that disconnection begins with the way they've been speaking to themselves for years. We are not just flesh and bone, we are spirit, and our spirit listens to everything we say, even silently. So if you want to change your life, begin by changing your language with yourself. Be gentle, be real, be courageous. Say this hurts, but also say I can move through it. Say I don't know yet, but follow it with I'm willing to learn. Speak to yourself the way you would speak to someone you're trying to bring back from the edge. Because sometimes, we are the ones on that edge, and the only thing pulling us back is the whisper of our own kindness. When I speak to myself this way, the way my soul needs to be spoken to, I begin to experience the world through a different lens. It's as if the universe leans in closer, takes note of my self-honoring, and echoes that respect right back to me. Faith is often misunderstood as something that belongs inside the walls of a temple, a mosque, a church. People talk about religion like it's a label, a set of rules, or a cultural identity. But when you really sit with the soul of it, when you strip away the noise and the doctrine, faith is something else entirely. Faith is a language the heart speaks when the world has no answers. It's the quiet strength that shows up in a mother's whisper to her child, in the hands of a man who kneels in prayer before dawn, in the gaze of someone who chooses forgiveness over fury. Faith is not confined to a book, and yet books like the Quran hold generations of faith, reverence, and the sacred breath of millions who've turned to it when there was nowhere else to go. When a sacred text is harmed, whether it is burned or mocked or dismissed, what's truly under attack is not just the physical pages, it's the very essence of what that book represents. It is not about ink and paper, it is about memory. It is about dignity. It is about the unseen threads that connect people to the divine and to each other. For some, the Quran is more than scripture. It is the sound of their grandmother reciting verses in the kitchen, the feeling of peace that washes over them during times of uncertainty, the rhythm of their childhood mornings, and the grounding of their adult questions. Sacred texts become sacred not just because of their content, but because of the way human beings breathe life into them. I've had the honor of sitting with people from every kind of spiritual path: Muslims, Christians, Buddhists, atheists, seekers, and skeptics, and what I've learned is this: reverence is not reserved for the religious. Reverence is a way of being in the world. It's how you treat something you may not fully understand, but choose to honor anyway. It's the deep knowing that some things are not yours to desecrate, not because of rules, but because of respect. We don't need to share a belief to honor the sacred in someone else's tradition. We only need to recognize that sacredness exists, and that when we dishonor it, we diminish something in ourselves too. When someone takes the Quran, or any sacred object, and defiles it, what they are really doing is declaring a war not just on faith, but on the very human need to feel connected, to feel seen by something larger than ourselves. It is a disruption, not only of peace, but of spiritual ecology, because everything we do, every act of reverence or irreverence, sends ripples. That is why even outside the realm of religion, people feel a deep discomfort when they witness acts of desecration. Whether or not you believe in the words of the Quran, you can feel when something sacred is being violated. It touches a primal part of us, the part that understands the weight of silence, of ritual, of prayer, the part that understands that there is something holy about honoring what someone else holds holy. We live in a time where it has become too easy to mock what others find meaningful. We throw opinions like stones, forgetting that behind every belief is a lifetime of stories, trauma, healing, and hope. And yet, the strongest people I have met are the ones who choose reverence over retaliation, who say, "This hurts me, but I will not hurt back," who say, "You may not honor my sacred, but I will still walk in a way that honors yours." That kind of power doesn't come from the ego, it comes from the soul. There's a wisdom that lives in every sacred book, but there's also a wisdom that lives in how we treat those books, and those who hold them close. The Quran, like every sacred text, is not just a set of verses, it is a vessel. It carries generations of prayers, questions, miracles, heartbreak, and revelation. To burn it is to try and erase something eternal, and what always follows such acts, no matter how far they reach or how loud the flames, is a whisper, the whisper of consequence, the whisper of a truth that cannot be unspoken, because even when pages are turned to ash, the spirit of what they hold lives on in the hearts of the faithful, in the air, in the soil, in the quiet spaces where reverence still breathes. There is a rhythm to the universe that we can't always see, but it is always there. It's the kind of rhythm that doesn't need validation or applause, it just is. I call it the law of energy and consequence. and it's not about karma in the way people toss the word around on social media, like some quick justice or revenge fantasy. No, this is deeper than that. This is about understanding that everything we do carries a vibration. Every action, every thought, every intention becomes part of the atmosphere we live in, and the atmosphere always reflects us back to ourselves. This is not about punishment, this is about alignment. When you pour out hate, even in the name of righteousness, what you receive is disconnection. When you act in a way that diminishes the sacred, whether it's a person, a belief, or a space, you separate yourself from the very harmony that your soul longs for. That separation has a cost. Sometimes that cost shows up in ways we expect, like broken relationships, unrest, or failure. Other times, it shows up quietly, in the form of emptiness, or that deep gnawing ache that tells you something is out of place, even when everything looks fine on the outside. I've learned that energy doesn't lie. You can say all the right words, perform all the right rituals, show up in all the right ways, but if your intention is corrupted, if your spirit is out of sync, life has a way of bringing that to the surface, not because it wants to hurt you, but because it wants to bring you back into alignment. That's the gift, hidden in consequence. It's not there to destroy, it's there to redirect, to teach, to make you look inward, and ask, where am I out of step with truth? So when someone commits an act as violent and symbolic as burning a sacred text, what they've done is not just a physical offense, they've ignited an energetic imbalance. The Quran, like all holy books, is more than literature. It is a conduit of devotion, a spiritual mirror, a collective memory of millions. When that energy is disrespected, the universe doesn't just shrug, it listens, it responds, it rearranges things, and often it does so in silence. I've seen it happen time and time again, sometimes on the grand stage of history, sometimes in the private spaces of people's lives. A person acts out of arrogance or cruelty, convinced they are in control, only to find that something they didn't account for begins to unravel in their lives. And what's most interesting is that the consequence doesn't always come in the same form as the action. It doesn't need to, because this law of energy isn't about matching the harm, it's about restoring balance. You take from the sacred, you lose something sacred. That might be your peace, your clarity, your purpose, your voice. Something will shift. There's also the other side of it. When someone responds to hatred with integrity, with calm, with inner strength, that too carries an energy, and that energy reverberates. It brings more peace, it invites healing, it raises the frequency of the environment it touches. We are always contributing to the energetic field around us. Whether we realize it or not, we are either building harmony or disrupting it. This is why awareness matters so much, not perfection, awareness. Being awake enough to recognize when we are operating from fear, or ego, or pain masquerading as power, when we realize that we are not separate from the world we create, that every word we say, every choice we make, is either a bridge or a wall. There are laws that govern nature, gravity, seasons, growth, and then there are spiritual laws, the ones that govern how energy moves, how actions reverberate, how truths rise. These laws aren't written in textbooks, they're written in the outcomes of our lives. You can't burn sacredness and expect light to follow. You can't desecrate and then demand peace. There is no skipping the reckoning, not because the world wants to punish us, but because the world wants to stay in balance. It wants to remain whole, and so it calls us again and again, back to that wholeness, through consequence, through reflection, through the very outcomes we thought we could avoid. There's a moment after every storm, after every act of violence, after every outburst or conflict, where everything becomes still, and it's in that stillness, not the noise, not the fire, not the crowd, that truth begins to reveal itself. That's what I've come to learn over the years, not just from the public moments I've witnessed, but from the deeply personal ones too. Silence is not empty, it is not void, it is not absence. Silence is the space where clarity speaks. After the chaos, after the act that shakes people, rattles their spirit, and demands a reaction, there's a window, a sacred window, and what happens in that space determines what comes next. not just in the outer world, but inside of us. I have learned to honor that space, even when it's painful, especially when it's painful, because silence after destruction is where the reckoning begins. It's where we hear the questions we tried to drown out with outrage or distraction. Who am I becoming? What does this say about us? What do I believe? Really, when someone desecrates the sacred, burns a holy text, commits an act of deep disrespect towards something that others hold close to their soul, there's an initial wave of emotion that sweeps through people: anger, hurt, disbelief. All of it is valid, all of it is human, but then, if we allow it, comes that silence, the moment when we stop reacting and start feeling, not just the surface feelings, but the ones that go deeper, the ones that force us to look at the roots, not just of what happened, but of who we are. I think of silence as the soul's listening chamber, the place where we hear what our ego tries to mute. In the silence that follows a spiritual violation, something ancient rises. It's the remembrance of everything that sacred object ever meant. It's the prayers, the generations, the nights spent in devotion, the tears shed in search of God, the gratitude whispered when life felt too heavy. You can't destroy that with flames, you can't erase that with defiance, and in the quiet, that truth becomes undeniable. There's a kind of divine intelligence at work in silence. It slows us down, it makes us feel the weight of things, it strips away performance, and reveals essence. And while silence can feel like absence, it is often the moment right before transformation. It's the breath the universe takes before it responds. It's the second before truth rearranges the room. I've seen this happen on a personal level too. When betrayal happens, when someone says something that cuts you to your core, when you walk away from a moment of confrontation and the adrenaline wears off, and all you're left with is your heartbeat and your thoughts. That's the moment when something sacred has a chance to be born. If we're listening, if we're willing to sit in the discomfort and ask the questions that make us tremble, in that quiet space, we see things we couldn't see when the world was shouting. We remember what matters, we recognize the cost of forgetting it, and sometimes, in that silence, we don't hear anything at all, but we feel it, a shift, a pull, a knowing that something unseen has changed. The silence after a sacred object is destroyed or mocked is not a silence of weakness, it's not surrender, it's not apathy, it's a gathering of spiritual force. It's the moment the soul begins to stitch itself back together. It's the ancestors watching, it's the prayers rising, it's the energy aligning, and in that moment something moves, not with sound, but with presence. People often mistake loudness for power, but I have learned that some of the most powerful responses are born in silence, not in action, but internal action, the turning inward, the listening, the understanding that while someone else may try to reduce the sacred, they can never define its worth. That happens within, and that process begins, always, in the silence. There's a fork in the road that each of us faces when we're wounded, insulted or wronged. It's not always loud, it doesn't always come with flashing lights or clear directions, but it is there, a quiet moment of decision. Do we meet hate with more hate, or do we choose something harder, something deeper, something more transformative? Grace. I've learned that grace isn't weakness, grace is strength under control, grace is power choosing not to destroy, grace is the highest expression of self-respect, when someone else has shown none, when someone desecrates what is sacred to you, when they try to rip the soul out of something you revere. It is so easy to be pulled into their energy. They throw fire, and your first impulse is to grab fire too. That's human, that's survival, but grace calls for something higher. Grace says, I see what you've done, but I refuse to become like you in order to respond. That's not surrender. That's sovereignty. I've watched people from many faiths, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Buddhists, Seekers, experience acts of violence against their sacred spaces and symbols. I've seen their eyes hold more than sadness, they hold disappointment, weariness, and a kind of ancient grief that rises not just from this act, but from centuries of similar wounds. And yet the ones who choose grace carry something unbreakable. Their faith is not dependent on the approval or understanding of others. Their dignity is not shaken by those who misunderstand it. They do not become small just because someone tried to belittle them. That is grace. Grace does not mean silence. It doesn't mean avoiding truth or suppressing pain. It means allowing truth to be spoken with honor. It means allowing pain to breathe without allowing it to poison. Grace is not the absence of justice. It is the presence of wisdom. It is the ability to say, "This hurt me, but I will not let it hollow me." In fact, when grace is chosen, it doesn't weaken a community, it strengthens it. It calls people into deeper integrity. It invites reflection instead of retaliation. It demands that we show up, not as wounded versions of ourselves, but as the healed, evolving people we are becoming. And grace doesn't just affect the one giving it, it affects everyone watching. That's the quiet miracle of grace. It inspires, it disarms, it confuses those who expect rage, it humbles those who expect war. I remember hearing someone say that the greatest form of protest is to remain fully human in the face of inhumanity. Grace is how we do that. It's how we keep our hearts soft in a world that keeps trying to harden them. When sacred texts are burned, or beliefs are ridiculed, or a community is targeted for their way of worship, the insult is clear, but grace allows us to rise higher than the insult. It doesn't erase the wrong, it transcends it. And there's a difference. Transcendence doesn't mean you forget. It means you grow beyond the reach of the one who tried to diminish you. You carry the memory, but you let it shape you, not shatter you. In moments of deep disrespect, grace becomes not just a personal decision, but a collective act of resistance. It says, "We will not crumble." It says, "You cannot make us like you." That refusal to hate back is not passivity, it's discipline, it's restraint. It's the refusal to let your soul be hijacked by someone else's brokenness. And I've seen what that kind of grace can do. I've seen it quiet rooms. I've seen it move those who thought they couldn't be moved. I've seen it heal the one offering it, even as they're still grieving what was lost. Grace is a choice we make again and again. It is a muscle we build in the dark, in the quiet, in the aftermath. It is the force that says, "My response will not be dictated by your ignorance." It is the silent power that rewrites the story, not by erasing the pain, but by showing that the pain did not win. Grace doesn't mean forgetting, it means remembering who you are, even when someone else has forgotten who they are. It means honoring the sacred within yourself, and refusing to abandon it for the sake of revenge. Grace doesn't scream, it doesn't demand, it simply stands, tall, clear, unmoved, unbreakable. What we hold sacred reveals who we are, not just in belief but in behavior. And when that sacredness is violated, we are given a choice, not just in how we react, but in how we respond to the deeper questions being asked of us. Who do we become when we are hurt? What do we protect when the world shows us its ugliest side? In the silence that follows devastation, in the energy that stirs when something holy is disrespected, and in the grace we offer instead of vengeance, there lies our truest power. This is not about a single act of desecration, it is about how humanity continues to define itself, through the reverence or disregard we show one another. It's about whether we allow darkness to pull us down, or call on the light that has always lived in us. Because when sacred things are burned, insulted, or torn apart, what rises next isn't just consequence. What rises is reflection, accountability, spirit, the collective knowing that the sacred is not something you can truly destroy. It is not contained in pages alone. It is carried in hearts, protected by prayer, sustained by the quiet resilience of faith. And so, when we speak to ourselves in the language of truth, grace and reverence, even when the world forgets, we reclaim the divine, not just for ourselves, but for generations watching, wondering what strength really looks like. Strength that doesn't lash out, but stands rooted. Dignity that doesn't shout, but glows. A sacred power that no flame can touch.